This morning's sermon is about the Lord bowing the heavens and coming down, a reference from the 18th Psalm. And so I ask, what would it be like to witness the Lord's birth from the perspective of an angel in heaven? We have the story of the host of angels celebrating the good news with the shepherds. There had to be tremendous rejoicing in heaven. On that desert night, the angels articulated their excitement of the Lord's birth with a quality of joy that goes far deeper than any joy we could comprehend on earth. But there was more to it than simple joy. The angels' expression of happiness isn't just an inconsequential detail of the story. Their interaction with the Lord is a key part of the Advent with its universal system that the Lord put in place supporting the salvation of the human race. For the Lord to accomplish his mission of saving humanity, heaven had to change, and with it, the angels needed to change as well. And with these changes, the relationship between the Lord, heaven, and the human race was altered for all time. This shift was spoken in the heavenly doctrines like this: Jehovah came down in the form of divine truth, which is the Word, and which was God with God, and took upon himself the human form so as to reduce to order everything in heaven, in hell, and in the church. For at that time the power of hell was stronger than the power of heaven, and on earth the power of evil was stronger than the power of good. So utter damnation stood threatening at the gates. This impending damnation was removed by Jehovah God by means of his human, which was divine truth, and thus angels and people on earth were redeemed. The Lord's reordering was a dramatic event that altered everything in the spiritual world. At the time of the Advent, the angels didn't know the full nature of the changes that he would be asking of them. Well, we can completely understand that hell needed reordering and subjugation, and we could say the same thing about the world, which was at the time of the Lord's advent filled with cruelty as a product of deeply ingrained selfishness. But it might seem surprising that the angels in heaven also needed to change their ways of interacting with both the Lord and with the human race. This was reflected in the 18th Psalm, our text, which prophesies of the Advent by saying, Jehovah bowed the heavens and came down. Now, one would think that this reference to the angels would be joyful and filled with happiness, but it's actually pretty dark. The psalm makes clear the reference to the conflict that was to take place with the Lord's coming, even in the heavens. We read that he came down with darkness under his feet, and that he made darkness his secret place, and that thick clouds passed with hailstones and coals of fire. We see something here of the gravity of the Lord's purposes with the angels, with the reference to bowing the heavens, which here actually means to prostrate or stretch out or to humble or humiliate, none of which sounds particularly easy, joyful, or lighthearted. The heavenly doctrines build on this by noting that even the angels were challenged by the Lord's coming, and that while they certainly rejoiced and welcomed his advent, part of the Lord's purposes involved serious temptations on their part. The state of heaven, by the time the Lord was born on earth, was that angels had assumed at least some responsibility and ownership for tasks that really were the Lord's. So they were inserting themselves in the work of saving people in efforts that reflected their own proprium or self-interest. They also wanted to help the Lord in his process of glorification by showing him what they thought he should be doing. This was a boundary that had been crossed by the angels, who had been moved from supporting and protecting and inspiring with the Lord's goods and truths, crossing over into a place where they were attempting to meddle with the outcome by inserting themselves inappropriately into the equation. The Lord, through his life on earth, was able to reestablish this boundary. He showed them that through his becoming divine human, God, present in perfect human form, that while it is the role of angels to cooperate with the Lord, they in no way were to contribute anything from their own self-interest into the work of salvation. This was unnecessary. Consider this teaching about the Lord with his interaction with the angels. We read that when the Lord made the human within himself divine, he too had communities of spirits and angels around him, for it was his will that everything should be accomplished in keeping with order. But he chose for himself the kind of communities that would be of service, and he changed them as seemed good to him. Yet he did not take any good or truth at all from them and apply it to himself, but only from the divine within. The indication is that the angels themselves tried to supply goods and truths to the Lord, thinking that they could change him. But of course, even the angels could not do this, for no finite being can teach the infinite anything. What's implied by this here is that the angels had something selfish embedded in their desire to teach out of an effort to manage the Lord's divine purposes in life. And this mistaken notion had to be dealt with and laid aside. And so in response, the Lord bowed the heavens, meaning that he humbled the heavens. Then he was able to differentiate his divine work from the angels' genuine abilities of introducing his goods and truths and using them to bring light to situations that are evil. He clarified that his divine role for the angels is to simply act as messengers to the human race. Messengers and nothing more. After all, the name angel is an ancient word meaning nothing other than messenger, or perhaps messenger of God. You could say that an angel's job is to share the Lord's messages. And with the Lord's advent, the angels were warned to not attempt to author those messages themselves and leave any trace of their own proprial or selfish nature. The Lord's coming in human form allowed then angels to redirect their focus on what they were permitted to do to help. And while there was nothing from their selfish nature that they could do for the Lord, they could serve him by communicating about states that they were experiencing, states that they themselves experienced, and states that they observed by interacting with others. This shared information about these states allowed the Lord to respond to those states from himself with his divine love and his divine wisdom. So this might be considered deep theology, because from our earthly perspective, it's difficult for us to fully comprehend. But the point is that this is important information for us from the perspective that the angels and the kingdom of heaven continue to play a critical role in our lives today, helping us prepare for heaven. Not only does this explain how we are influenced by angelic communities that are subconsciously around us every moment of every day, but the example of the angels teaches us how we too should be interacting with others. So if one was going to boil down the reasons of the Lord's advent into the simplest of terms, it would be this: the Lord came to provide the antidote to selfishness at all levels of human spiritual existence, including heaven. The Lord came to bring awareness that self-centered living was destroying the universe, threatening all human life. To take that a step deeper, the Lord came to reestablish the notion that selfishness comes from the false belief that the life we are living is our own. That notion, which is the origin of all evil. Then, we falsely believe that we are the origin of our own happiness, and in consequence, we believe that we generate our own pleasures, and that we believe we manufacture our own insights and our own worldview, and that we are responsible for our own success and progress in life. And the fact is, this is all an appearance. We do not own any of it. And therefore, we can't claim true responsibility for our thoughts, for our wisdom, for the uses that we perform, or anything that might be considered successful. This was perhaps the most stunning news that the Lord brought with his birth. It was news to heaven, to the human race, and certainly to spirits in hell. One might also say that this news was the greatest gift that the Lord could bring to the world. The concept that we, as human beings, do not actually own anything. Everything that contributes toward our ability to be truly human in the Lord's image and likeness flows into us from above. Consider this earth-shaking passage from the Arcana Celestia. If a person were to believe as things really are, which is that everything good and true comes from the Lord, and everything evil and false from hell, he could not have been found guilty of any offense or had any evil ascribed to himself. But because he believes that it begins in himself, he takes evil as his own. For this belief causes this to happen. Thus, evil clings and cannot be separated from him. Indeed, the person's nature is such that he would be indignant if anyone told him that his thoughts and desires came from others and did not begin in himself. This teaching unlocks the key to what it means to be a human being. In order to be human, one has to come to realize that nothing originates in self, and that everything of conscious human life originates outside of self. Human beings are receivers. They are vessels of life. And knowing that and living according to that knowledge allows us to become human and to be saved. To put it another way, the Lord came into the world to make clear to all human life that no finite being is the origin of their own life. The Lord grants us the ability to experience life as if of ourselves, but that is only a feeling which is generated by the experience of receiving life from the infinite. And it's a feeling. It's not the reality. Scripture teaches this in many places, and I'll just turn to two. We read from the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' words, "Let your yes be yes, and your no be no, for whatever is more than these is from the evil one." And this is echoed again later in the message to the rich young ruler, when Jesus said, "Go and sell all that you have and give to the poor, and then you will have riches in heaven." These passages are not suggesting that we divest ourselves of all material possessions. Rather, they teach us that aspects of our lives, all aspects, are entrusted to our care, allowing us to interact with and use them to serve others. All of our abilities, all our insights, all our possessions are simply means for us to serve the Lord and His kingdom. They are not ends in themselves, and as such, they offer no intrinsic happiness on their own. And we're taught that realizing this is the origin of all human happiness. And we're also taught that when this is a person's state, peace can be granted to him, for he trusts solely in the Lord, nor can peace be granted to anyone else but those who have that faith springing from charity. For others constantly plunge themselves into anxious cares and evil desires that give rise to feelings of unease. These are powerful teachings. All of our happiness, our entire sense of peace, they're dependent on recognizing that all good and all truth and all falsity and evil are from sources outside of self. When the infinite Lord, who was divine love and divine wisdom, who was divine life itself, was born on earth as a human being, he showed mankind that he was the origin of all life, all wisdom, and all happiness. His greatest gift to the human race was letting us know that he alone, through his divine humanity, gives us the ability to be human, to live, to serve, and to love others. He alone brings the power to overcome evils. Evils that, when we're convinced that these evils are ours and we can't live without them, we can't separate ourselves from them. And so reflect on this. True Christianity describes the Lord's birth as having caused the spiritual sun to shine 7 times more brightly than before he was born on earth. The angels, they bowed, they humbled themselves to let this divine power shine anew into the world. And with this miraculous event, the human race is offered the ability to receive the power of the Lord's love and wisdom in such a way that it enables us to live and serve and bring the message of the Lord's gentle, healing love to all the world to see. Amen.